Are you struggling to create an intentional headspace, unable to connect deeper with yourself? Come, and together let's address the elephant in the room. I'm your host, Sinead Roche, and this is the Uncomfortable Podcast. Sometimes when I'm in class and I start to raise my hand and I start to kind of speak about this idea that I have, I oftentimes, when I start to notice that people in the room, they kind of have this like inquisitive look in their face, then I start to kind of lower my voice, I start to mumble more, and at the end, I kind of just toss the idea aside and say, never mind, actually, it was really stupid that I even wanted to put my hand up in the first place. And there's also times when I'm looking to post, something on TikTok or Instagram, and I'm looking at the content that I have, and I'm starting to realize, or I kind of just have this thought process that people might think that my life is so boring, or that my room isn't aesthetically pleasing, or that, what I have on isn't aesthetically pleasing. And it kind of makes it really hard for me to want to show any of it. And oftentimes I kind of look at certain videos and I'm just like, why would I even bother posting this? People are going to think it looks so stupid. And I also have times that when I'm recording myself, especially in public, and when I try going to cafes maybe, the minute I take my camera out, I automatically have this idea in my head that everyone thinks, oh, she's really trying right now. She's trying to be something. Doesn't she think, who does she think she is, basically? And that makes me sometimes put the camera down, and sometimes I just kind of sit there not having fulfilled kind of my goal for that day because I'm really afraid of what people are thinking about me. And even when I show people, my podcast at times, or when I speak about it to random strangers, I also go through this thought process of these people probably think another podcaster, who does she think she is? Does she really think she's going to make it? And safe to say, what a lot of these experiences that I've just talked about have kind of in common are they show you a lot of my insecurities, 100%. They show you my reactions to experiences that I undergo alone when I'm out in public. But what they really have in common, and what I really want to talk about today, is that they show you that I'm afraid to be seen and I'm afraid to be vulnerable. And I know I post every single day, or I try to post every single day. And so maybe you might be thinking what do you mean? You kind of still are able to fight, through that potential embarrassment or through that fear of being perceived. And maybe I am able to kind of fight through that, but I still have that thought process. And that is something that kind of hinders me because, despite the fact that I'm able to show up for certain goals that require me to make myself seen and noticed, that I've self-imposed, I still have this kind of underlying belief that people are going to perceive me in a way that I don't want to be perceived. And unfortunately, I don't have control over that. And I think that's something that I struggle with, and I don't just want to be someone who's able to kind of push past it in terms of just the practices and the habits, but also mentally, I want to be someone who's able to overcome this. And I think that this is also something that a lot of people struggle with. And that's kind of why I wanted to talk about it today, because I think that this topic of being afraid to be seen and being afraid of how people are going to perceive us is something that we definitely need to address, especially as we're persons who are looking for new opportunities. We're looking for new promotions, maybe new relationships, new relations, new connections. And I find that the only way that you get yourself into the right spaces and get yourself in contact with the right people, or just kind of, you get to experience the right types of experiences, is if you overcome this fear of being seen. And as someone who knows what it feels like to play pretend with people, which I've been doing when I was growing up for quite some time. My brother even used to say that like there's a version of me when I'm outside of the house, and then there's the version of me when I'm inside the house. And it even took some time for me to let people like actually see me, I feel like. And only even then, I'd only let people see certain parts of me because I'm afraid of being rejected. I'm afraid of what they'll think of me if they'll see me as less than. And because I know what that feels like to feel embarrassed or to kind of shy away from showing yourself despite being an extrovert, I think that this is something that needs to be addressed because it impacts us for the rest of our life and like kind of how we carry ourselves throughout life. And I want to be someone who's able to walk into a room and feel like the room has kind of been waiting for me without the, I guess, mindset that I currently have where I'm like, do people think I'm walking a bit weirdly perhaps? Or what are people thinking of me kind of constantly? And so I want to talk about the fear of being perceived today. And what that kind of feels like for me personally, at least, is my heart starts to race. The minute when I start to feel a bit insecure or when I start to feel that other people, they might be looking at me weirdly or something, or they might be thinking that I'm like really silly for doing something or just kind of look down on me, I start to become really quiet. And I have this tendency, like my reaction to it is kind of to over explain, and I'm seeking kind of like still for their validation, especially once I've already kind of, I guess, noticed, or I think that I've noticed that they're like looking at me weirdly. And there's a lot of reasons why many of us most likely have this kind of fear of being seen and fear of being perceived. And I think it's because a lot of early experiences have taught us that the minute you are visible to people is the minute that you become vulnerable. And then people will attack you and people will look down on you. And I think a lot of experiences that have taught us, that if we ever show ourselves fully, we'll only face criticism. If we ever try anything new, then people will only laugh at us. I think that's a big reason as to why we're already afraid to be seen by others. I think that, experiences that showed us that we can get rejected by people, perhaps when we show them like our weird interests or just quirks about ourselves, or just show them a different part than what they've initially seen. I think that kind of tells us to keep our authentic self hidden and to not take up too much space and to walk into rooms basically and try to be as kind of palatable, or not palatable is not the right word, but easy to kind of be around, make it so that it's a pleasant experience for other people rather than allowing yourself to show who you naturally are and show who your authentic self is. And I think sometimes it's also, seeing that our cultures, maybe our communities, and maybe certain parts they would also reject, has kind of taught us to keep it hidden. And I mean, there's lots of experiences of kind of that show you why, you shouldn't want to show yourself. And safe to say, I think if you don't address the fact that these experiences have happened, and not only just address the fact that they've happened, but also that like you've kind of adopted what that key takeaway from the experience was, and realize that kind of you now reject yourself, but also don't even allow yourself the opportunity to kind of to show yourself anymore. I think when you don't acknowledge that this has become like a part of your thought process, then you don't allow yourself to, I guess, live in your authentic self. And as someone who really wants to happen to life. And like, I don't just want life to happen to me, I really want to have an impact on my life and be intentional, and get the right opportunities and step into the room in the way that I want to. I know that I kind of have to address the fact that these experiences of being rejected and of having, being critiqued by other people or having other people's thoughts and opinions of me matter more than my own opinion of myself. I know that I have to address this, and I know that I have to unlearn this automatic reaction that I have to hide myself. Because I really want to stop freezing up and second guessing myself. And I want to shoot my shot, and I just want to feel like it's okay to be me and not to worry so much about what other people are thinking about me constantly. But I know that's kind of like easier said than done. And I think at the baseline of what it even takes to kind of unlearn all of this is that you need to separate your self-worth from other people's unpredictable opinions. Which, even that, it doesn't even sound easy to do actually, but I know that I have to do it. And I hope that you also, coming to this episode, that you're also aware that this is something that you kind of have to get over with. And the way we're going to do that, unfortunately, or fortunately, is through exposure therapy. Because exposing yourself in manageable, stressful situations allows us to help to break the cycle of avoidance and kind of retrain our brain and establish healthier associations in terms of, what it means for us when we walk into spaces where we're maybe new to the space. And the only way we kind of are going to be able to but the only way we're going to be able to get to the places where we need to be and the places that are going to be accepting of us and that are right for us is, unfortunately, if we already expose ourselves to the possibility that people are going to have something to say about us. So, what does this look like and how can we start? First of all, because we know, most likely, I know, and I've just said I know what it feels like to get rejected, from past experiences. I know what it feels like to already believe that people are going to reject you, or believe that there's someone's going to say something bad about you, basically. And so we need to start off small, and we need to start off in safe situations and in safe spaces. So what could this possibly look like? For me, what that means is that I start off maybe with showing a bit more of myself to friends who I already feel a bit safe with. And I remember when I was younger and in high school, I really loved reading smut books, which I'm not afraid and I'm not ashamed to admit anymore. I really loved reading these romance books, but I didn't used to tell anybody about that stuff. You're young, and I guess there's always that notion about smut books, which I understand, but I'm pretty sure a lot of us were, reading Wattpad when we were 13 or 14. But anyways, I was reading these books, and I remember that I told one of my friends about this at track practice. And I kind of exposed myself, or let myself be seen, or let a part of myself be seen. And I was really kind of afraid when I was telling her, oh, what is she gonna think about me? Is she gonna think I'm weird or something like this? But funny enough, I also found out that she was also reading those types of books. And, I'm still friends with her till this day. But because I was able to show myself in a safe space and to a safe person and show kind of something that I was already afraid, people are going to look at weirdly, I kind of was able to ease my way into showing myself, but I was able to be myself freely. And from that experience, I think also because I didn't get rejected, it kind of highlighted to me that, oh my gosh, maybe it's not so bad that I have this kind of guilty pleasure of mine. And, once I was able to show her that part of me, I was also able to talk about other things more freely and kind of like just tested out the waters with someone who was already a safe space to me. But even though they were a safe space to me, I hadn't kind of fully allowed myself to be vulnerable with them. So again, to start off small, maybe like to expose yourself if you're not someone who's really completely yourself with everybody, even at this point in life, whatever point you're at in life. Maybe it's nice to just like talk to a friend and kind of tell them about like a hobby of yours that like you've kind of kept hidden, or like just a guilty pleasure of yours. And that will maybe already show you that like, hey, it's maybe not so bad being myself fully, and showing that to other people as well. And then maybe from that, you start to level up. So perhaps a goal of yours is to start taking like, pictures of yourself. And maybe how you can start this off is that you go outside, you maybe take pictures of like the landscapes around you. And then slowly you maybe take a selfie of yourself. And then slowly, after you've kind of understood, okay, no one is really saying anything towards me, or yeah, maybe people might be looking at me, but I don't even know really like, what they're thinking 100%. And you kind of get comfortable practicing this. Maybe you can start to put your phone up somewhere, or like bring out a bigger camera and take a picture of yourself. And maybe that's how you then kind of allow yourself to be seen, and kind of just practice going through this experience. And, you push past the thoughts that you personally have, the thoughts that you personally have that you believe that other people are thinking that, oh my gosh, why is she taking a picture of herself? So you kind of practice going through this habit by like slowly allowing yourself to expose yourself, but like in small increments, basically, in terms of the exposure level and like how big of a risk it might be. And then another like example in terms of what this might look like is if you're someone who's trying to, get into this habit of going to places alone, but you're afraid that people are going to think that like you're really lonely, and that you're, you don't have any friends perhaps, or that you're just alone, and that, they may pity you. Then what I would suggest is maybe start going to a movie theater by yourself, because that's in the dark. So no one can see you, and maybe you're just going there for an experience with yourself. And then what I'd suggest is then maybe go to a cafe by yourself, see how that feels. Then level up, go to a restaurant by yourself, maybe go to a bar by yourself. You can break this down so that you eventually get to the point where you're able to sit in a fully crowded room by yourself and not be consumed by the idea that other people are thinking like, oh, she just looks like a loser or something, And you do that by, again, breaking it down so that you can kind of get to the big end result, or just learn what that feels like and put yourself in that situation so that you can at least not continue to avoid it. And the point of all this isn't that you just like test, what it feels like to express yourself, and what it feels like to expose yourself, but it's also so that you can, understand how you react within these scenarios. And it's not maybe focusing so much on whether or not people are approving of you, or whether or not people are even like staring at you or something, but it's about understanding how you kind of handle all of this, and how you handle even like the thoughts that are even roaming around in your head, when it comes to you maybe thinking that someone is thinking this about you. And I think what you can do in order to start practicing this is maybe like start with once a week. You put yourself in a situation that you normally shy away from, where maybe your body normally tells you to like, oh my gosh, run away as quickly as possible. And instead, what you do is maybe you fight it and you push yourself to expose yourself and kind of, be there in the moment. And you kind of, not kind of, and what you do then when you're in this moment is I want you to take notes of like, what thoughts are occurring in your head, what's the reality versus what are the opinions like, or what are the potential opinions you think other people have of you right now? Is there any evidence to back up the fact that people think that you're weird right now? If there's not, then let's continue to move on. And I think it's really important to note down also, what are your thoughts saying about yourself? And for me, when I was starting this off, I think especially when it came to recording in public, and even now sometimes still, is I realized that this negative voice of mine that kind of adopted, the potential ideas that other people had of me was kind of just talking to me and telling me that like, oh, you're so stupid, or you're so silly. What are you doing here right now? And what I had to acknowledge is that I already had this kind of negative mindset or like negative idea of myself. And in order to counter that and stay within the moment and kind of fight through this fear that I'm being seen and this fear that people actually have these ideas about me, is I had to reassure myself. And for me, like reassuring myself and kind of grounding myself, it looks like me talking myself through it basically. And I look like I'm having, or not look like, I have this conversation in my head where I'm basically trying to counter every single like negative thought that kind of comes up when I'm doing something by myself or when I'm trying something new for the first time. And let me not lie, it's a bit exhausting, but I think it's even more exhausting just constantly being kind of like held down by my already pre-existing negative thoughts. And this is why I say it's like also really important maybe not to do this like all the time, but like to start off slow. Maybe you do this once a week and put that energy into kind of, reassuring yourself and trying to catch those negative thoughts that you have of yours already. And if talking to yourself doesn't help to kind of like ground you, I think also like breathing exercises might help. Or sometimes, even I still do this to some degrees. I still call up friends when I'm having these moments of doubt. And even if I'm there by myself, like maybe I'll shoot a text to someone and be like, hey, can you like help me real quick, because I feel right now that everyone is looking at me as if I don't belong here, and I would really appreciate, some reassurance. And once I've kind of asked for help on their end, I can kind of take it over and acknowledge to myself like, hey, you know what? This isn't going as bad as we thought. And I think what's really important, again, I say this a lot, is every experience that you kind of go through, it allows you to collect like feedback and data about yourself, which is why I think it's really important that you take notes about, what works well for you, what doesn't work well for you, what helps to reassure you in these moments versus maybe what makes it even worse at times. And so that way you kind of continue to build up this toolbox so that you understand, next time when you come into the scenario and you start to feel insecure, which that's, I think, a larger part of why we're even afraid to be seen by other people. When you start to feel that like doubt and that worry, you can quickly understand like, hey, last time this helped me to cope through this experience, maybe this can help me again. And then, of course, not every experience, I think, especially as they become bigger experiences where you kind of expose yourself to even more risk and maybe even more vulnerability, not every experience has positive outcomes where we realize it's not actually that bad. And occasionally we get rejected, occasionally we get made fun of. And in these situations, I think it's really important that you allow yourself to feel that. You allow yourself to maybe feel a bit bad that happened, maybe take the hit, and maybe sit down, cry a bit, maybe journal about it for a bit. But what I don't want you to do is kind of just ignore it and not really process the moment, because it's going to come up eventually. So you might as well allow yourself to feel it right now. But I don't want you to feel it. And this is kind of where you have to know yourself a bit in terms of, kind of maybe quote unquote micro-dosing basically that hurt and that pain of it. I don't want you to feel it to the point where you start to adopt it as your own mindset and as your own thoughts and feelings about yourself, because I think that's what we've done with so many other experiences of rejection and hurt. And I think that's why we're in this situation in the first place, as to why we're afraid. And I think it's really important that you stop this kind of process of just adopting whatever has happened as your main example of yourself, of the main example of what happens when you put yourself out there, because then you're just going to continue this pattern that you've had in the past. And then you kind of just end up again at the first position that we were in the first place, which is we're afraid to be seen. And I know personally, as someone who still struggles with this, I know that slowly coaxing yourself, it's scary, and it's weird sometimes also trying to just be yourself, which unfortunately that should be the easiest thing to do in the world. But I think what you realize after you go through so many experiences of exposing yourself and of seeing that maybe it's not as bad as initially we thought it was, or maybe we can kind of start to block out what we think other people are thinking about us, or that we can handle it actually and cope well, is that people, it's not really important what people could possibly be thinking about us, but really what we're thinking about ourselves already. And I think that's sometimes even harder to address and to change, because like I said, you might have adopted these thoughts and these opinions about yourself that are actually other people's opinions, or maybe you already have these notions about yourself already. And that's why I already talked about this in episode 10 about, coping with your insecurities. That's why I talked about this, because there's a lot of tangible practices within that, also relating back to exposing yourself, that could help you to already address that mindset that you have about yourself. Because it's one thing to, I guess, challenge the notions that other people have about you versus then challenging the notions that you have about yourself that originate from you. And so if you haven't already, please go back and watch that episode, because I think that does give you a lot of tangible tips to kind of change your perspective on yourself. And then it's kind of easier to, not easier, but it makes it allows you to already have kind of some tools and a bit of a more of an understanding when it comes to then addressing how other people basically view you, and what it means to challenge that, or what it means to challenge the potential that people could be thinking, something about you. And I think then at the end of the day, even though it is really difficult, because this has been a built up habit for years that you most likely had, I think you can evolve and change your mindset, from, oh, I'm so scared that people are going to be thinking that I don't belong in this room, to basically this idea that, oh my gosh, people are so excited to be seeing me in this room, or not even that people are excited to see me, but oh, I'm really excited to kind of show myself here, and I'm really excited to find the right opportunities basically, or meet the right people. So rather than making it about our ability to change other people's minds, it's also about our ability to kind of change our perspective on ourselves and what it means when we walk into a room. And I think when you can start small, track your progress, understand, what helps you to cope, eventually, as you expose yourself to these bigger, risks, and allow yourself to be seen in bigger ways and more often, what's going to happen is you're going to get the right opportunities. You're going to meet the right people. You're going to get the right connections. You're going to have the experiences where you feel like you really are yourself. And I think, despite there still being rejections, despite people still potentially giving you a weird look or still perhaps perceiving you in some way that you don't necessarily like, I feel like you're going to be so busy with all of these opportunities and with meeting the right people. And hopefully you're going to frame all of these examples as kind of like your primary examples when you think of what it means to kind of show yourself, that the ones that don't go the right way, perhaps, like, so what? You're too busy with the ones that went the right way and that, allowed you to have so many great opportunities. And while it doesn't feel natural, while it doesn't feel great having to kind of have this, back and forth with your own self, I think it's all going to be worth it when you finally feel free. And that doesn't happen if you just continue with the same habits that you have right now. Because if the habits that you had right now were actually helpful, then you wouldn't be afraid to actually, just be yourself and be seen. So with all that said, I want to ask you guys today, a request of mine is to put yourself out there at least once this week. Put yourself in a situation that you normally shy away from, or maybe you're afraid to be seen. And I want you to take note of how you soothe yourself. And if you're not even soothing yourself within these moments, and if what automatically happens is just you clamp up, that's even a bigger tell that you need more coping strategies. And maybe you'll practice some new ones, whether that be talking to yourself, whether that be calling up a friend, whether that be grounding yourself and kind of taking deep breaths. But at least you know what your starting point is. And maybe then we can move forward so that we can finally get to a place where we can say hey, this is who I am. And you might have some opinion about it, but honestly, I'm really happy to be me. I have my coping strategies and I'm not afraid to be seen. Guys, thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning into this week's episode of the Uncomfortable Podcast. Make sure to tune in every Monday for a new episode on Spotify and YouTube, and go ahead and check out our TikTok and our Instagram for more content. Bye.